Hello, everyone. This is Ed Denzel, host of Unfound. I wonder if you will consider becoming a supporter of this YouTube channel. By pressing the join button below, you can receive, for just 10 cents a day, the video version of the podcast a day early, the Unfound Now episodes a week early, daily video updates from yours truly, and cool emojis to use during the Monday night live show. Please consider it as you watch the following spectacular video. Thanks. Brandon Richart was a 41-year-old from Anoka, Minnesota. He was the father of 4 and loved to help others. On November 5th, 2021, in Anoka, Brandon met with a young man who had hit Brandon with his car a few days before. At this meeting, Brandon was to receive at least $1,000 in cash for his injuries. He was never seen again. I'm Ed Denzel, and this is Unfound. Although I haven't yet done any statistics on the topic, perceptually, there does seem to be a correlation, if not causation, between car issues, car accidents, let's just say car problems, and disappearances. Why could this be? Maybe because we spend so much time in our vehicles. Maybe because, despite wrecks being down over the past 50 years, road rage and the like are way up. Or maybe because more people are driving when they are unfit to do so. Drug addiction is way up in the United States. Thus, we have more impaired drivers. Some examples from Unfound's own catalog of cases. Shane Fell flipped his car and disappeared in Louisiana. Esther Westenbarger drove into a pond. Daniel Villarreal hit other cars, then ran off, allegedly. Jason Landry wrecked his car and seemingly walked away. Ronald McNutt, his truck with a body in it found over a cliff in Northern California, and that body has still not been identified. And we have many that involve vehicles in general. Well, with the disappearance of Brandon Richart, the wreck occurred a couple days before, yet he wasn't even driving. Still, what transpired from this unhappy accident? And now a summary of the case. However, this is not on the Charlie Project. Brandon Richart was a friendly type of guy. In fact, maybe a little too friendly, in that he couldn't realize when people were taking advantage of him. Brandon ended up having a relationship with a girl he knew from his childhood. They became a couple in the late 2000s and had 2 daughters. However, there were problems for Brandon. He had problems with maturity. And after Brandon's breakup with the mother of his 2 daughters, he developed a meth addiction while with a new woman in his life. However, at the time of his disappearance, Brandon was in a program to get his life in order. So, on November 3rd, 2021, 2 days before his disappearance, Brandon was on his bike and got hit by a car driven by an 18-year-old. On the spot, the driver agreed to pay Brandon in cash so as to avoid getting insurance involved. Then on November 5th, Brandon was due to meet the driver, Dominic, to collect the money at a McDonald's in Anoka. Video shows Brandon was there. Then, according to Dominic, after handing over the money, he gave Brandon a ride to Spring Lake Park. Brandon got out of the car and left. He was never seen again. Searches and the investigation were hampered by nobody realizing Brandon was missing until 9 days later when his girlfriend Gina called Brandon's family to ask about him. The past 2 weeks, we covered the disappearances of men who are very much like Brandon Richart. Addiction issues, life issues, relationship issues, job issues. Well, with Brandon's, we add in a cash transaction that seemed to be the worst choice of all possibilities. Keep that in mind as you try to answer these 3 questions during the interview. Number 1, what are the odds that Brandon, a guy who was hurting for money, would get into a wreck where the driver would offer to give him cash? Number 2, did the story really change from one time to the next regarding the trip after the McDonald's meeting, or is it just the telephone game? And number 3, how would we view this disappearance if the accident from 2 days before never happened? Brandon's family and friends are convinced foul play occurred to cause his disappearance. The guest for this episode is Brandon's ex-girlfriend and mother of 2 of his children, Jenny Whiting. Unfound News. The newsletter came out yesterday. If you're on the list, you got it. If you didn't, please email me at unfoundpodcast@gmail.com. Another interesting 3,000 words plus from yours truly. Next, we will have a very special guest on Unfound next Friday. I'll be announcing who that will be on Unfound Live this coming Monday. Finally, the next Unfound Now is now available on YouTube for those who have joined as members on the channel. Everybody else, you'll have to wait until next weekend. So please consider becoming a member and support everything Unfound does. Thanks. Where you can find Unfound on these following podcast platforms: Spotify, iTunes, Stitcher, Podbean, and many others, especially outside the United States. The new podcast, Unfound Live, which comes out on Tuesdays, can also be found on these platforms. Social media sites: YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and the newest one, TikTok. Listener support sites: patreon.com/unfoundpodcast, paypal.me/unfoundpodcast. The website, theunfoundpodcast.com. The email address, unfoundpodcast@gmail.com. And please mention Unfound at all true crime websites and forums. Thank you. I'm so happy to have on this episode of Unfound a very good friend of Brandon and the mother of 2 of Brandon's children, Jenny Whiting. Jenny, welcome to Unfound.
Thank you.
Let's start here. As I just introduced you, gave you a couple different titles there. Why don't you just talk a little bit about yourself first, your connection to Brandon. How did you 2 even know each other before you had a couple kids together? Let's start there.
So I met Brandon when I was like 7 or 8 years old through my older brother. It was his friend. So we've known each other for quite a while through that because he was just at my house a lot when we were younger. And so I pretty much just knew him. He was always over at our house spending the night, whatever. And so I knew him for many years, approximately like 17 years before him and I developed a relationship as adults when I was about 22. So that's how I kind of met Brandon.
Yeah. Could you have ever predicted when you knew him way back when that you 2 would become a couple? Was that something that came up that was kind of unexpected?
Oh, for sure, yeah. When I started hanging out with him when I got older, because there was like a time period where I moved back to Arizona, where I was originally from, and then I didn't see him for about 4 years or so. So when I moved back to Minnesota, we reconnected, and then that's kind of how that developed.
Mm-hmm. In approximately what year did you two end up becoming a couple? Just approximately. What year?
Like 2012.
Oh, okay.
2000, the end of 2011, something like that.
Okay, so about 10 years ago. Sometime in there.
More like 14 or so.
14 years ago. Well, that would have taken us back to like...
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, that was when our second daughter was born, was 2012. Our first daughter, she's almost 14, so that would have been in 2008.
Oh, okay.
Or the end of 7.
All right, so you had a relationship going way back to the 2000s.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. And, of course, you were not a couple at the time of the disappearance. So you two lived together for a long time. And how would you, maybe as much as you want to say, Jenny, about your relationship with Brandon? What was it that kind of, attracted you to him? Of course, you knew him a long time, but it obviously takes more than that for two to be a couple. What was it about him that, he became a friend and then a boyfriend, father of your children?
It was just, he was always such a good, happy, kind-hearted person. He would help anybody, no matter what he had or didn't have. He was always just, his love for life, I think, really attracted me to him. Mm-hmm. And, over the course of, we were together almost 10 years, and we were younger, I was 22, mm-hmm. and he's 5 years older than me.
Okay.
So he was like 27, and throughout those 9-10 years we were together, we just kind of grew apart as far as like what we wanted our life to look like, or things like that. It wasn't because we hated each other or anything like that. It was honestly a hard decision to even make, but we did just ultimately grow apart as far as that.
Okay.
Went.
Okay. And so you have 2 children together?
Yes.
And how old are they now? You said one is 14. How old is the other one?
Yeah, she's almost 14. Our oldest one, she's still 13. She'll be 14 in the beginning of June. And then our other daughter just turned 9 on the 16th of November.
Okay. Very good. Thank you. Let's just now talk a little bit about Brandon. Of course, you were his girlfriend, your mother of his children, but what would you say some of the qualities? What was Brandon into, his interests, personality? How did you think other people viewed him, his other friends? Just as a man, why don't you talk about Brandon?
Well, Brandon, he was always... like, that was one thing I really pushed for when we were together, was for him to, like, give respect to the people that also gave him respect. People would come to him and use him a lot of times, and because he was a good-hearted person, he was always happy, things like that. He was always there for whoever, so that opened the door sometimes for him to get used by other people.
See.
And so he was a very, I would say, more of like a vulnerable person to that, because he was so overly nice and overly caring that it made him kind of naive to what people would do to him and the way they would respect him. So
yeah,
it made it hard.
Did you ever, being that you knew him for so long, did you ever try to talk to him about that? What was his response?
I mean, he knew it a lot of times, but still had a hard time in the moment, because he was also very impulsive. He had like ADHD and things like that. He was very just impulsive in nature, and then when he would go back and think about it, he would be able to see like what I was talking about. Um, whatever, it was hard in the moment for him, you know. He always wanted to see like the good in people. I mean, everyone makes mistakes and stuff like that, but he did have a hard time like fitting in throughout his childhood as well, which I knew, with others. So he always was looking for acceptance from other people, which led him to, again, being used or vulnerable to others. So even talking was hard to do sometimes, because it was always so in the moment that he was in, kind of.
Yeah. He just wanted to help people, maybe didn't see the downside of that sometimes.
Exactly.
Yeah, okay. What about, maybe I need to ask about this. What about his family? You already said that he had a brother. How many siblings did he have? And was he close to his siblings, the rest of his family, his parents, whoever else? Was he close with them?
Oh, yeah. His mom and I and his dad were the closest people to him, even leading up to him disappearing, as far as people that wanted good from him or for him, and that weren't like people that would use him. So I mean, he was very close with them, and he has 2 half sisters and a half brother that was from his dad. They have the same father.
Okay.
So his dad was married prior to Brandon's mom, and so that's where his half siblings come from.
Okay. And with this, was this all in the Anoka, Minnesota area, or was that somewhere else?
Yep, all in Anoka County, yeah.
Okay. And so he grew up in the general area where he went missing.
Yes.
Okay. And you still live in that general area now?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So he has family. All these family members are close. You're with him for several years. And I think, and the listeners should understand that Jenny is not a suspect. Of course, sometimes we are very suspicious of ex-girlfriends, ex-boyfriends, the like. I can assure everybody, Jenny is not a suspect in any way in Brandon's disappearance, which I think will be very obvious once we get into all of this. So, but I do have to ask, what was it eventually that broke you two apart, and what year was that when that happened?
It was approximately 2015, and it was more so, like I said, just growing apart. As I was going to college, I was working, I was doing a lot of the taking care of both of our kids, and he was having a hard time, I guess you can say, growing up, as far as like taking responsibility for some of the responsibilities we had in our life, whether it be with the kids. He was having a hard time finding out what he wanted to do with his life, as far as, just different work aspects, and was kind of and it just got very exhausting, honestly, on both of our parts, that it just kind of led us to grow apart. But we always still maintained like interaction. I mean, I still spent majority of every holiday with the girls at his family's house, and he would come there. I mean, he would still call me for advice, or whatever. If I ever needed anything, I could always call him too.
All right. So I guess what you're saying is it was kind of I'm sure it was very tough on both of you, but you managed to stay friends after.
Absolutely.
Okay. And how long, how often, I should say, how often would you see him or talk to him?
Prior to the last, I guess, 5 years, when he found a different girlfriend who made it very hard. I mean, we would still talk almost daily, multiple times a day, or, for sure weekly, but then the last 5 years has been harder to do that as much, just because of, I guess, the person that he was with. It just made things more difficult. So, I mean, it was still, I don't know, monthly. Sometimes it would be more often. but towards the end of his disappearance, he was trying to like restabilize his life. So he had gotten into a program that was helping him with that, and he was calling me again daily, for the sake of purposes for like talking to the kids and showing, stability and things like that. So up until 2 days before he went missing, he had been calling me every day for the last
Wow. All right. So it seems then getting closer to his disappearance, you had more contact with him than ever.
Yeah, than in the past 5 years, for sure.
Yeah. Okay. Very good. And we're going to talk about this new girlfriend, girlfriend he had for 5 years here in a moment. Am I then to understand that there's really no official custody arrangement with the kids? You just had full custody and he could see them wherever he wanted, or what was the arrangement?
The arrangement, yeah. I mean, I had all of the custody of the kids, and he knew that the kids were, perfectly good with me, and the arrangement was, as long as he wasn't in any sort of trouble, and that he could see them whenever at his parents' house, as long as, there wasn't the girlfriend around who would cause problems in front of my kids, and he wasn't in any sort of trouble. He was welcome to see them whenever.
Okay, very good. All right, so we got a good idea about Brandon, his relationship with you, his relationship with his family. Now we'll get into that rehab that you talked about. But unfortunately, if we're going to talk about rehab, we have to talk about what caused him to go to rehab in the first place. And that, of course, was an addiction. We don't need to stay too much on this, but we do have to talk about it, given that you knew him so long. How did it start? Do you remember the first time you realized that he might have had a problem? What can you say about this?
Well, Brandon was sober the whole time that we were together, and he, like I said, had that impulsiveness, and I think it was hard for him to, I don't know, kind of just break apart in our relationship, that he just was hanging around people that, did a variety of things like marijuana, and then he did get into a little bit of meth for a short time. But the program that he was specifically in wasn't just like rehab for drugs or alcohol. It was like a restabilizing your life. So it could be anywhere from somebody that was just, maybe homeless or lost their job and needed to restabilize, their help with that, like, so housing and just different things. It was like a kind of a universal place to help people with any sort of life-changing circumstances.
Okay. Would you say that he ever had any addictions before you two became a couple? Do you even know anything about that? Or was this something that really became a problem after you two broke up?
Yeah, I mean, that's when I feel like it really did become a problem. I know he had some different using prior to us being together. But as far as us being together, he was pretty much sober the entire time as far as all that. I mean, he occasionally would drink or things like that I knew of, but nothing ever to where it was a problem.
Okay. All right. And you believe, though, that what eventually drove him to this rehab that we're going to talk about in a second, because it was kind of an unusual setup, at least as far as I can tell. But you think that crystal meth was like his big issue? That was the reason?
It was more so him trying to, he wanted to better his life, and him and this girl were using that as what my ending is. Yeah. And so he was doing different things to, I guess, try to sabotage their connection to that. So that's where I think some of these problems came in prior to his disappearance, was his different things he was doing to try to sabotage that connection, because from my understanding, she was having a harder time letting go of that type of lifestyle than he was.
Okay. All right. So we're just going to say that does it surprise you that he got into an addiction, knowing him as long as you did? It didn't. Okay.
Well, it didn't, because after like him and I broke up, he felt very I think lost in what he wanted to do, and like the reasoning behind us breaking up and different things was his lack of growing up and things like that, and just knowing the impulsiveness of his behaviors, that he was easily led astray.
Yeah.
It didn't really surprise me that much, because that he fell into it like that with those type of people.
Okay. Let's move on to this rehab situation, because once again, I think we need to understand this, even just the location and how long this had been going on. This was actually being run out of a residence in like a motel in the area, and was it called Stepping Stone? What can you tell the listeners about it, just so they can get an understanding of how is this thing being run out of a hotel? Like, people were staying there? What is this?
So it's a program, and they have like a main facility, but then with COVID and things like that, there was many people that have different life-changing circumstances, which led them to, I guess, rent out a portion of this hotel that was like an overflow area for some of the people in need or help. And so, of course, amongst them, there's people that want to truly help themselves, and then there's people that want a place to stay. So, there's a mixture of people in there, but there's different like guidelines, I guess you could say, where you attend different meetings with counselors, with different people from housing units, from job counseling, to different ways to like how to improve your life overall.
Okay. And let me ask you this. I just have to ask you this. So, after you two broke up, though, was Brandon at times kind of homeless?
He stayed with his parents, as like that was a structured, stable place. It kind of just got to the point in the relationship that he was in, where it just wasn't helping him to give him that safety net anymore. It got to the point where it was kind of like he needed to do some of this work on his own to really truly realize, like, and be grateful for the different things that would accumulate if he did it on his own, type of a thing, because it just was getting too, I think it was like made too easy to always have that safety net. So his parents were trying to help him and things like that by showing him he had to do some of this stuff on his own.
Okay. Let's move on to this woman that you've spoken about a few times now, and I know you have a very strong opinion of her. Just in general terms, why don't you tell the listeners about Gina, how she and Brandon met? Did she know him like for a long time before they became a couple? Did they have any children together? What can you say about her and Brandon?
Well, leading up to his disappearance, they had been together for 5 years, and they had 2 children together, which both they gave one up for adoption, and the other, I guess, signed their rights over to her mother, so they didn't have custody of either one of them. But they had 2 children together. It's my understanding they met through mutual friends. And apparently we had gone to school together, which I never really knew up until Brandon had disappeared, that we even went to the same school together. I had no knowledge of her prior to them meeting, who she even was, but that's my understanding of how they met.
Okay. Is she, when you say she like might have gone to high school with you, I realize that Brandon's a little older, but is she like your age? Is she like Brandon's age, or?
I think she's in the middle. I think she might be a little bit older than I am, which I'm 37 right now.
Okay.
So I think she is maybe a year older than me. I'll be 38 in like a week.
Okay.
So,
all right. So, but your understanding is that you all three went to the same high school, but you have no recollection of her.
right.
Okay. When was the first time you had ever even heard her name after you two broke up? I mean, how were you? Were you ever like introduced to her by Brandon, or what was it? How do you even know?
Once they got together, he had introduced me to her, and that's the first time I even had any knowledge of her at all.
Okay.
Well,
Okay. And in your opinion, was she a negative influence on Brandon?
I mean, it didn't take me long to find out that she did have a negative influence, but I always try to give people a chance and form my own opinion. But it took probably maybe a couple of months for me to realize that, their relationship was not healthy.
Okay. All right. And did you see once they got together, in your opinion, did you see a big change in Brandon by him dating her? Did he look to be in worse shape than he was when he was with you?
Oh yeah, for sure. He, after being together for 6 months, I mean, I knew for sure that she was making it harder for him to even talk to our kids together, whereas at the very beginning, she seemed as if she wanted him to see his kids. But I mean, after about 6 months, I started seeing changes in his behavior, the things his lack of like wanting to try to put effort into like small things to like meet up with the kids or call them. The way he looked seemed to start to be different. He would, tell me about different fights that they would start to have. I mean, he was pretty open with most things to me, but it just became harder and harder for him to even, like, for example, come to Christmas and open some presents with the kids. She made it very difficult.
Okay. All right. So you would also say that Gina was not a big fan of you?
Well, I think she was more at first maybe intimidated by me, but then she seemed okay with me for a while. And then, then definitely after the 6 months, she seemed to just come up with all these different reasons as to why we were not, or she did not want him talking to me.
Okay. All right, and you have told me that during this time that they were together, they did have some housing issues, that they were living in a tent, they were living like in a storage unit. Are these things all true?
Yeah, so he had been on a waiting list with the Stepping Stone program for probably about 15 months or a little over a year, something like that. So during that time, in between, losing that safety net at his parents' house, and getting into the Stepping Stone program, they were, I don't know, roughing it, staying wherever they could, and some of those places, from what I heard, did involve, staying in storage unit or a tent or things like that.
Okay. And what were your understanding? The best, I realize you have your own life to live. You were taking care of your kids, Brandon's kids, but to your best understanding, what were they doing for money?
I mean, I know that, with some of the COVID things, they would get those relief packages or whatever. They also, I mean, I'm not even 100% sure sometimes, but I mean, I think they would, find extracurricular ways. Okay. A lot of which I didn't even really want to know how.
I gotcha. I guess what we're saying here is neither of them had steady jobs.
Exactly.
Okay, we'll just leave it at that. Okay. So they're together, kind of roughing it, going through some tough times. Brandon's trying to get his life straightened out. Not sure if Gina is helping that or not. In the meantime, you have full custody of both of your kids that you have with Brandon. You're living your life. You're going to school, as you stated, and all of these things. And we come up to November of 2021. So this is just a little over a year ago. And we know that the disappearance date is November 5th. But what do you know about what happened on this particular date in early November of 2021? What do you know about this crash? I realize that you were not there. The listeners have to understand you were not there. But what have you been told about Brandon and Gina being together and there was a crash? What do you know about it?
I know he was staying at the Stepping Stones hotel, and right on the frontage road that you need to pass, there's really no other way. The end of this frontage road comes to a college. It's a community college. So when you leave the community college, you go down this frontage road and it passes right by that hotel, and he was on his bike. And apparently, because Gina was not enrolled in this program, it was Brandon enrolled. So she couldn't go inside and take a shower. So I guess she was going to go to the college and take a shower. And he was on his bicycle, and she was there somewhere too. And there was a kid leaving the college. And what the kid was doing, I'm not sure, but somehow was distracted and hit Brandon on his bicycle, where he flew off of the bike. And he had some injuries to his hip,
Wow.
his leg, his arm. I believe it was the right side of it.
Okay.
But I guess it was witnessed by Gina as well. The bike was ruined, and it had broke his cell phone that he had.
Okay.
So it's my understanding the kid stopped, and after they had talked, that the kid and Brandon came to some arrangement where the kid was going to give him money instead of calling and reporting the accident.
Okay. And we I think can at least use this kid's first name. I think that the full names are out there somewhere, both of this teenager and his dad, but for now we're just going to call him Dominic. So Dominic is driving the car, and then it is your understanding that Dominic was at fault in this accident?
Yeah, I mean, he admitted to hitting Brandon and not, however, it happened, but he admitted that.
Okay, so Brandon just tooling along. Gina's, I guess, on a bike too?
I believe she was actually on foot.
Okay. And something happens. Teenagers are the worst drivers. That's why their insurance rates are so high. So maybe this isn't unusual. Something happens, and the kid isn't watching where he's going, hits Brandon. Brandon is able to walk away from it, even with these injuries. But in the process, he and Dominic come up with this arrangement that to keep this off the insurance books and keep the police out of it, that money would exchange hands. Do you know how much money that was?
Dominic said the full amount they agreed on was $4,000.
Wow.
But how much he had ended up giving him is up for debate. I'm not 100%. But anywhere from $1,000 to $2,000 is what he had given him.
Okay.
2 days later.
Okay, and we're going to get to that. Did you know about this, you personally, did you know about this accident involving Brandon and Dominic before Brandon went missing?
Yes.
How did you find out about it?
Brandon had told his mom and I a little bit about it.
Okay. And at that point, during that conversation, did Brandon ever say anything about any money?
Yeah, he had said that was what was that's what he was going to do, because he didn't want the kid to get in trouble with his parents, whose car the kid was driving, or Dominic was driving. So that he didn't want to, get that put on the kids' record and go through all of that they agreed on this settlement of money, and we didn't think that was a great idea for him to do that.
But that's what he was going to do.
Yeah.
Okay. So I guess what we're saying is, in your opinion, at the time, of course, you don't know that Brandon's going to go missing in a couple days after this. In your opinion, at the time, you thought this arrangement had been made so the kids' insurance wouldn't get dinged, and also maybe even to keep this to the point where his parents didn't even know about it.
Right.
Okay, that was your impression when you spoke to Brandon about this wreck. Oh,
right.
Okay, great. Do you know if I realized he didn't have any money or anything, but were the injuries bad enough that he ever went to an emergency room, for example?
No, he didn't end up ever going to the doctors or to a hospital.
Okay. Did you ever see pictures of these injuries?
Yes.
You did. How, if you can explain them, how bad were they? Of course, you're a mother. You're used to dealing with kids with boo-boos and bruises and everything else. How would you explain how bad these injuries were?
I mean, I wouldn't say that they looked life-threatening at all. I mean, they were pretty much superficial from what they looked like. He did have some swelling, some scrapes for sure down his leg and on his hip, and his arm.
Wow.
But they didn't look life-threatening to me from what I could tell.
All right. So no, in your opinion, once again, I realize you didn't see them firsthand. No broken bones, for example.
No, he did have a limp that he was walking with prior to his disappearance, but there again, nothing that's I could tell from how he was describing it or like from the pictures I saw, nothing that to be like they would be life-threatening at all.
Okay. All right. So then you find out about this wreck, and you know that Brandon is going to get money from this kid Dominic, $1,000, $2,000, and we'll talk about what Dominic said later. But did you know that they would be getting together at this McDonald's on November 5th?
No.
Okay. What is your understanding then about what happened on this date, November 5th? We realize, not to foreshadow things, but stories change that we'll get to later. But what is the generally accepted scenario of Brandon being at this McDonald's in Anoka, Minnesota that day?
It was that he went to this McDonald's and that they had made this plan. Gina and him had made this plan the night before. I guess they had been talking with Dominic through Gina's phone, because when Brandon had gotten hit, 2 days before his disappearance, his phone, like I had mentioned, had broke, and so I guess Gina and Dominic had exchanged phone numbers at that time through her phone. So this texting occurred to set this meetup was through her phone, and I guess it happened must have been then the 4th of November, and that they were going to meet Dominic at this McDonald's at noon on the 5th.
Okay.
And that he was going to give him money.
Okay. And what was at least the original story that Dominic told? Once again, your understanding, we'll get into all the time in between, but what is generally accepted happened on that day?
That Dominic was running a little bit late to the McDonald's, and he was in a hurry because he was going to go out of town. And when he got to the McDonald's, Brandon was there, and that he gave Brandon $1,000, and that he gave him a ride and dropped him off in Spring Lake Park, and that from there Dominic left and was going to give him more money once he returned on that following like Sunday or Monday after he got back from out of town, and he was going to give Brandon then more money at that point.
Okay. But according once again to the original story, that after Dominic dropped Brandon off at Spring Lake Park, and we'll talk about the significance of that in a moment, that is when Brandon went missing.
Yeah, because that's the last known footage we have from him was that McDonald's. So that's the last we know.
Okay. What is the significance of Spring Lake Park? Why? Of course, we know that there's this McDonald's where he is, and we know that there's the Residence Inn, which is not in Spring Lake Park. It's in the opposite direction of the McDonald's. What would be the significance of Dominic or Brandon wanting to go to Spring Lake Park?
Well, that's where, we had all gone to high school with Spring Lake Park. We knew different people in the area. There was also a bike that he had, another bike, not the one he had gotten hit on, but another bike that he had like kind of chained up at this apartment complex that he wanted to get.
Wow. Okay. So he had like multiple bikes. He kind of just stationed them in different locations?
Well, just the two bikes he had.
Okay.
And I don't know if because one bike he would ride and the other Gina rode, or somehow they got, so I don't know, but he had two bikes.
Okay. So this is the story. This is the original story. Dominic takes Brandon, gives him a ride down to Spring Lake Park, and it seems like a decent idea that Brandon needed his other bike and he might as well get a ride down there instead of walking since he had this injury anyway. Is there a video of Brandon at that McDonald's that day?
Yeah, before getting picked up by Dominic.
Okay, all right, we'll come back to that. So when does everybody, maybe you, of course, you're talking to Brandon quite a bit. You even stated you were talking to him a lot before he went missing. But it seems like the 5th is the last day that anybody saw him or talked to him. When does everybody start realizing that something isn't right? Was it you? Was it his family? Was it somebody else? What can you say about those next few days? The 6th, the 7th, the 8th?
Well, it was actually for 9 days before we actually knew. But after like about 4 or so days, his mom and I were like, have you talked to Brandon? No. Have you talked to him? And then we kind of thought that maybe it was just because Gina's phone number was the only number to get a hold of him at, that maybe she was just not wanting him to use her phone, so it was making it kind of hard for him to call, or maybe we weren't 100% sure what was going on. But then on the 9th day is when Gina messaged Brandon's mom saying she hadn't heard from him in multiple days. Well, multiple days we didn't know really was 9 days. We thought maybe 2 days, or something along those lines.
Right.
But here we found out it was 9 days before she even contacted his mom.
Wow. Okay, so you're saying approximately, so he goes missing on November 5th, so you're saying like the 14th is before Gina contacted anybody that you know of.
Right, and then that would bring us to the day before my youngest daughter's 8th birthday.
Yeah.
And so we had her birthday, and that's when my sister put a post on Facebook saying, has anybody heard from Brandon? And, really nobody had heard from him. So then the very next day, actually the 16th of November, is when we made the police report. 16th or 17th. We made the actual missing person report because it had to be so long from when we found out he went missing.
Right. Okay. Now let me just ask you some questions about a little bit of that. So you don't hear from Gina for 9 days. Of course, you didn't have a very good relationship with her either. Doesn't sound to me like Brandon's family didn't really maybe have a very good relationship with him. But in those maybe first few days, you get to the 7th of November, 8th November, 9th of November, did anybody actually try contacting Gina to see, well, we haven't heard from Brandon. Did you try contacting her at all during that time? Anybody, not just you.
I believe his mom tried calling him a couple of times to her phone without success.
Okay, so might have been tried, but Gina never got back to her.
Exactly.
Okay. And when you found out about this story, Gina saying, well, I haven't heard from him in 9 days, did your mind automatically go back to that day that he was supposed to be meeting Dominic about that money? Did you automatically think about that?
We found out all of that during the time when we finally talked to her. So that we had no clue about him actually going through with the meeting up until then.
Okay, so
but then I even reached out myself to Gina at that point saying, Gina, you seriously have not heard from him, because it was not like her to not hear from Brandon and not start blowing everybody's phone up if she wasn't with him.
Okay. Would you say that when she did not hear from him, of course, her story, she hadn't seen him or heard from him in 9 days, would you say that she sounded worried?
No, because when I reached out to her, she pretty much said, figure it out yourself, and was not very nice about it. So it was almost like a not give a care type of attitude.
Okay. So even though she contacted Brandon's family looking for him, on the other hand, she wasn't very open to talking to you.
Oh yeah, not even. She wasn't really even open to talking to anybody, honestly. She was pretty much just like, figure it out yourself.
Okay. Even though she was looking, even though she was the one who admitted that Brandon was missing.
Yeah, she was. Yeah.
Okay.
Exactly.
All right. Thank you. Who finally files the police report? On what date? Are there searches done? Let's talk about the police in regards to all of this. Who do they talk to? Let's just talk about the police part of it now.
So his mom and I sat at my house and we did the missing persons report together over the phone. And then I got on my phone and I made a bunch of like missing person like flyers. That's the very same day, and we really started like pushing that fact that he was missing through social media, as well as handing out. We had like a flyer drive on the 27th of November last year. We had a search party, which involved search and rescue and volunteers as well. And we did multiple searches, I guess you could say, with search and rescue help, along with just like the community, with no luck. But one of the places was where he went missing, or was last seen, at that McDonald's, as well as like the Mississippi River's right there, and there's a few other places like towards the Spring Lake Park area. One of which was like a nature center where we did a search, as well as, calling the lock and dams that, from the Mississippi River and things like that, going out of Minneapolis. And we really were pushing like social media and got a lot of success with like spreading the word that way too.
Okay. In the work that was done over all of those days, were there any credible sightings of Brandon after November 5th?
No.
0. Okay. Now, one thing that I thought was particularly interesting about all this regarding the searches when all this started getting done is that we already spoke about this bicycle that he had at Spring Lake Park, which is allegedly where Dominic brought him. What can you say about that bike at Spring Lake Park? Was it there all those days later when people started looking for Brandon?
Yeah, it was there, and it eventually got taken by the police officers into custody, and whatever it is they do to try to look for evidence there, but the bike had been chained up the whole time.
Okay, so it was chained. On the other hand, if something, let's say, of a foul play nature, we don't theorize on these interviews, but still we'll do this. If somebody did something to Brandon, then they would have had access to a key that would have unlocked that bike, do you believe?
I believe it was like a code type of a lock.
Oh, it was. All right, so a combination lock.
Yeah.
All right, that only probably Brandon would have known.
And or maybe Gina.
Okay, that makes sense too. Okay. So if we're to put this kind of in a timeline, he goes to the McDonald's. Dominic has this story that he takes Brandon to Spring Lake Park, just the two of them, and we'll come back to this later. But that bike's down there, and it seems if Brandon did get dropped off down there, something happened between him getting dropped off and him getting to this other bike.
Right.
Okay, very good. All right, so all these searches are done. No signs of him. No credible sightings of him, anything like that. And we'll get to some of these people and what they had to say to the police in a little bit. But I just want to remind everybody once again, Brandon's injuries. Could he walk? How far could you say he could walk with those injuries? Any ideas? Your opinion?
I mean, he was walking. I guess. I don't think, like, if he needed to get somewhere, those injuries would have stopped him from getting there. So that's just, I feel like he would have figured it out. They weren't, like, preventing him from walking, I guess, completely. He had a limp, yes, but I don't feel like it really would have stopped him from walking the distance he needed to.
Right. And we also might think about the idea that if he was injured bad enough that he might not have been able to ride a bike, he might not have been able to, like, bend a leg to push, like, one side of the pedals or something. Possibly.
Or if he was, right, no, he was able to, from my understanding, that, I mean, according to where he got dropped off, it was also right by a hospital, so if he was injured that bad, I mean, he would have been able to go there.
Okay, very good. All right, so injuries, not maybe that any would want to have, but it doesn't sound like any broken bones or anything like that. Okay, let's move on to this. He did have a cell phone, although it got damaged, it seems, in the original crash with Dominic. But was the phone still working? Could it still ping? Do we know anything about, not Gina's phone, but his own phone with any pings, records, any help with any of that?
So it's my understanding the phone still partially worked, but he wasn't able to really communicate onto it. Like maybe he could see partial of numbers, or that he could maybe answer the phone, but people couldn't hear him, type of a deal. It wasn't working properly, but still partially is what my understanding is.
Okay. But do we have any pings or phone records that are from November 5th regarding his phone? Do you know if the police have collected those? Do they even exist? Do we even know?
We don't. The hard part about it is the police can't really tell us much more than they could tell anybody else, because they have to use a universal precaution type of a deal. So as far as if they were able to gather those, I mean, I'm sure if I had to speculate that would be something I would do in a situation like this if I were the police.
Yeah.
So, I mean, whether or not they for sure got them, I mean, it's my understanding that would be something they would try to do.
Okay.
But I don't know that for sure.
Okay, but you've never been told that his phone last pinged at the McDonald's, his phone last pinged at Spring Lake Park, or anywhere else?
No, just that they were attempting to do pinging on it, and that's all they could tell to us.
Okay, very good. Let's move on to the McDonald's. This video, there is a still shot. I don't know if the video has ever been made public, but there is a still shot that they used to publicize in the area when he went missing. Can you describe that picture? I'll surely have posted a picture by the time everybody hears our voices. But can you describe that picture and is there a story about he wanted to use the phone at the McDonald's? What can you say about all of that?
Yeah, we were told that he asked to use the phone there, the public, or their phone that they had, their business phone. And he was initially told no, but then seemed, kind of anxious, and eventually they allowed him to use a phone. Gina told us that he called her one time from the McDonald's phone, and that's the last she had talked to him, was when he was there waiting to meet up with Dominic. Like I said, Dominic had mentioned he was running a little late that day, but eventually then they must have found each other, because Dominic said that he had given him a ride and did indeed meet Brandon. So, and that Brandon did use their phone. So all of that is what we do know about that.
Okay, so there's proof that Brandon was there. To your knowledge, is Dominic ever seen on the video at the McDonald's?
No.
All right. Okay, not to your knowledge. Very well may be, but we can only talk about what we know. Is Gina ever seen on the video at the McDonald's to your knowledge?
Not to my knowledge.
Okay. Anybody else who could be connected to Dominic or Brandon seen on that video?
No.
Okay. All right. So, and we do have the still shot. He's wearing some sort of hockey jersey or something?
Yes.
Okay.
Hockey
something.
Jersey and shoes his mom had bought him from Costco, which were, I think, Kirkland brand, and then some sweatpants or something.
Okay. Very good. All right, so from there, he was taken to Spring Lake Park, and I think what's most important for the listeners to understand is that Spring Lake Park from the McDonald's is in the opposite direction of where the Residence Inn, where he was doing the Stepping Stone program. Is that correct?
Yeah.
So I think Spring Lake Park is like to the south generally, and this Residence Inn, the Stepping Stone program was to the north.
Right, all to the north of Spring Lake Park. That being said, only like 20 minutes in between where he was supposedly dropped off and where the Residence Inn was, right. And then the McDonald's is kind of like in the middle of those two.
Okay. Let's move on to Dominic. Of course, he is the 18-year-old who got into this wreck with his crash, hit Brandon while Brandon was on his bike. It is presumed that it was Dominic's fault, given that it seemed that Brandon was the one who was going to get paid off because of it. Did police talk to him after Brandon went missing, and what did Dominic have to say? Is this when this first story came out about Dominic bringing Brandon by himself to Spring Lake Park? What can you say about that?
No, Dominic, Brandon's mom and I had spoken to Dominic one time. Mm-hmm. We'd gotten his phone number from Gina, actually, and we just had asked him some general questions, being that he was the last person to see Brandon, to our knowledge. So we had learned of the story through Dominic himself. Mm-hmm. As far as the police talking with him, that's something they can't say or not, and we have not been in contact with Dominic anymore either since that initial story. So I'm not 100% sure what Dominic did or did not say to the police. However, of course, we shared our knowledge of the story with the police, so okay. I do know that what we were told.
Okay, very good. Approximately what date did you and Brandon's mother get to speak to Dominic one-on-one?
It was approximately the date that we filed the missing person report, because I remember speaking with him while we were waiting to pick up the flyers we had made.
All right, so maybe 2 weeks after, maybe not that much, 2 weeks? 10 days?
I think it was like 10 or 11 days.
Okay. In your opinion, would you say that Dominic was forthcoming?
Yeah, I mean, he definitely seemed like it, because he had answered and told us he needed to call us back because he was in school. And he called us back. I mean, he didn't have to.
Okay. Now, maybe this isn't a coincidence, maybe it is, but Brandon actually knew Dominic's father, correct?
Yeah, I mean, we had no clue that, and there's no way Brandon could have known. Really, it was not somebody that was a close friend or anything, but somebody that we had known growing up. I don't believe Brandon knew that he had known his father, but we did.
Maybe you need to explain that. How is it even possible that Brandon knew Dominic's father from high school? Were they about the same age, or what?
Yeah, about the same age, and so just through them living, he had went to a different high school, but right next to the town so we went to Spring Lake Park, and his dad had went to Fridley, which is right next door to Spring Lake Park, and so that's how we known him, from like mutual friends and things like that.
Okay. In your opinion, does it seem, of course, maybe now that Brandon's disappearance is so well known, especially at least locally there in Minnesota, in Anoka, Minnesota, but I'm guessing then that Dominic's father eventually did find out that Dominic was in this wreck with Brandon?
Yeah, he did.
He did. Okay. So no, maybe good plan goes unpunished regarding this, and the father finds out that his son was in this wreck with Brandon, and there was this cash deal going on. However, we have to talk about it. In your perception, does it seem that Dominic's story changed from what he told you, and then he maybe told other people, or changed his story later, telling it to somebody else? What is your perception regarding this part?
Well, it's my understanding that he had, a friend of Brandon had called Dominic's dad, who also knew Dominic's dad a little better than Brandon did, and I guess had told this closer friend of Brandon, kind of in the middle of it, and who was also knew Dominic's dad a little bit better, that Dominic had said that he had picked up Gina after picking Brandon up, and gave them both a ride to Spring Lake Park, and had given them $2,000. But I don't know. It's really hard to say when with the telephone game and things like that. Right. But it's my understanding that the story changed a little bit.
Okay, so just for the listeners, I'll explain it. So when you spoke to Dominic, or the story that got back to you originally, was that Dominic said, yeah, I met Brandon, and then I gave him a ride alone, just the two of them in the car, down to Spring Lake Park. However, later, when somebody who also knew Brandon spoke to Dominic's father, the father said, yes, Dominic drove Brandon and Gina to Spring Lake Park.
Right. And gave him $2,000 instead of $1,000.
So. All right. So could certainly be the telephone game, but we have to talk about something like that when we hear two different stories, and it doesn't seem like I don't know why there would be any reason to lie or anything like that. So that always makes me suspicious. But the father wasn't there, and so maybe we have to keep this in mind. We're not going to be making any of these or talk about public, but you yourself have done quite a bit of sleuthing, I would say, talking to a lot of different people. What can you say just in general about the conversations that you've had? You've even spoken to Gina, you've spoken to this guy Zach, to Jen, some other people. In general, what can you say about those conversations and whether any of that has led anywhere?
I mean, the conversations that I had, nothing truly adds up 100% to me, I guess. And nothing has seemed to truly go anywhere of significance to my understanding. There again, I always, keep up hope and things that the police are doing things that I don't know about because
Sure.
they can't share anything. So, I mean, but nothing truly adds up to me or has added up in finding him this far.
Okay. Maybe I should ask you one more before we get into talking about Gina in a little more detail. Spring Lake Park, can you think of, being that you seem to know Brandon as well as anybody, can you think of any other reason that Dominic would have taken to him to Spring Lake Park besides the bike? Did Brandon know anybody down there that he needed to see? Was there anybody that he needed to pay off with some of the money that he was getting? Anything like that to your knowledge?
Not pay off anybody to my knowledge. It's just really hard to say. I know that Gina and Brandon, they always had a lot of disagreements. They were always, their relationship, like I had mentioned, was not healthy. So there was a lot of fighting that went along there with that whole ordeal. I know Gina had been having different relationships behind Brandon's back and stuff like that, which had upset him prior to his disappearance.
Did Brandon tell you? Is that what Brandon told you?
Oh yeah, I mean, she's even told me that. She's openly admitted that.
Okay.
To only me, but several other people. But I mean, so why he truly would go there could be up for debate. I mean, he could have went to just see a friend that and something may have happened. I mean, it wasn't uncommon for him to go to Spring Lake Park, so I mean, it could have been for numerous different reasons, but none of which that included him paying off anybody that I'm aware of.
Okay, very good. Thank you. All right, let's just talk about Gina a little more in depth. I will remind everybody that she was there when Brandon got hit with the bike. We know that bike was damaged. Gina did not get hit, but she would have been there when Dominic and Brandon were making this deal out for some money, the amount of which I think seems to be, at least even a year later, a little bit in dispute. Your understanding regarding Gina, she is not seen on the video at the McDonald's, but is your understanding that she actually was in the vicinity of the McDonald's that day when they met up, or not?
Yeah, she was within walking distance of the McDonald's.
Okay. Now, you've gotten to speak to Gina. At any point, did she ever state that after Brandon got that money that she was given a ride by Dominic to Spring Lake Park? Has anything like that ever come up?
No, she said she waited at the tent for several hours, waiting for Brandon to return to the tent which was in walking distance, and they had slept in the night before. For several hours she had waited. Once she went to go meet Dominic by himself, and he never returned, so she had finally left, I guess, is what she had said. And she had not seen him since he had left the tent and had not spoken to him since he called her from the McDonald's.
Okay, very good. Thank you for being so complete on that. Now, regarding Dominic, though, did he tell you this, or did you find out I just need to know the source on this. Did Dominic claim that Gina had threatened him?
Yeah, Dominic, I guess, I don't know if he used the word threatened him, but said that he had called him saying that he had needed to call her back, and that Brandon, I don't know, at some point she had told Dominic, from his own words, he had told this to me, Dominic, that she had said that Brandon was going to take the money from him and still turn around and turn him in for the hit and run. Or not the hit and run, the accident.
Okay, so what we're saying is between the crash happening on whatever that was, let's say November 3rd, and the disappearance date November 5th, Gina called Dominic, saying, kind of, I guess, undermining Brandon. Is that how we're supposed to think of this, or did this conversation happen after? What do you think?
It's my understanding that her saying that to Dominic happened after Dominic had given him whatever amount of money on the 5th.
Wow.
So I think this had happened after that.
Okay, so Brandon told you this right to your ear, I guess would say it. That's what Gina told him.
No, Dominic told me
Yeah.
that Gina had said this, and Gina also admitted to saying something along those lines too.
Oh, she did. She did say that. She even admitted that Brandon might turn around and turn him in anyway.
Yeah, because she said she wanted to scare him into calling her back. I guess,
okay.
but I don't know why that would scare him into calling her back. I'm not sure why she would think that, but that's what she had said.
Okay. Let's move on to this. After Brandon went missing, did anybody have access to Brandon's social media accounts?
Yes.
All right. And is there any proof that somebody on them was pretending to be Brandon?
Yeah, I mean, Gina admitted to going onto his account and talking to people, but she says because she was looking for him.
Mm-hmm. Would you say that she was on there just outright acting like Brandon, or was it obvious that it wasn't Brandon?
I think there was some things on there which people knew was not Brandon when they were communicating with her, but I believe that there was also things done where people did not know that that it was her. So I think, like, for example, she had made some phone calls to different people on there, so it would come up as if it were Brandon. Okay. And not leaving messages like it was her or putting it out there that it was her. So I think there's some, it was to everybody else say that.
I guess what I'm asking, being that you seemingly were following this and following Brandon's social media account and seeing everything that was going on after Brandon went missing, would you say for the most part Gina was actually trying to help, or would you actually say that maybe she was getting in the way of trying to figure out what happened to Brandon using his social media accounts? Your opinion?
My opinion was that it did no good for her to be on there. It could actually have damage.
Okay. All right, but she did have access to them somehow.
It made people think that they were being still contacted by Brandon, which caused a lot of confusion in trying to find him.
Yeah, sure. That would. That would. You're exactly right. It would confuse people quite a bit. But she somehow had access to his media accounts, even though he didn't have a computer.
Yeah, through knowing his passcodes, and like I said, Brandon was very vulnerable to people, especially her being in a relationship with her, having those 2 children taken away from her, or both of them, that they had together, that she just knew his passwords and emails and ins and outs like that. So that's how she had access to them.
Okay. Let's move on to this. Now, you've actually spoken to Gina, and has she ever, let's just start here. Has the topic of conversation ever been this allegation that actually she was with Brandon after he got that money from that McDonald's? Is that a topic that ever came up in any conversation you've had with her?
She has always just claimed she had not seen him since he left or spoke to him since he was at the McDonald's. When I asked her details of the events of that day, she is very generalized with them. And I don't know, I find it hard to truly communicate with her as far as getting straight answers.
Right.
So she's never ever changed. That's the only thing she ever says that has happened that day that she is aware of.
Right. and the listeners should understand what kind of made this kind of difficult also is not too long after Brandon went missing, Gina was in a very bad car wreck, correct?
Yeah.
Very, very, very bad.
Yeah, like almost lost her life.
Yeah.
She was put into a coma for, I think, I don't know, approximately 2 weeks.
Wow.
She was in the hospital for multiple months.
Right.
So they weren't sure she was even going to walk or even live through it, I guess. There was a point.
Okay. So that, of course, made following up with her very difficult. And we also have to remember when people go through accidents like that, they can lose their memories, their short-term memories, which could affect maybe some of her memory regarding Brandon's disappearance, at least theoretically. In talking to Gina, of course, before she was in this car wreck, did she ever offer up her own theory as to what happened to Brandon? Being that the two were living together, they were a couple, she knew he was getting this money, and then he goes missing, seemingly, allegedly, right after he gets this money. Has she ever offered up her own theory?
I mean, she's, pointed fingers at multiple different people for different reasons. But nothing that has ever went anywhere as far as led us to helping find him or anything like that. But she's pointed several fingers at different people, I guess, or theories of what she thinks could have happened.
Okay. Has she ever, in those conversations, has she ever expressed kind of disbelief or, any understanding of why here she was right down the street from the McDonald's, but Brandon decided to leave with Dominic, just the two of them alone? Has she ever been able to figure out why Brandon did that to her?
Yeah, she never has really said anything or figured that out from my understanding.
Okay, so that's never come up. She's never been like, this is just an example. Yeah, he was supposed to come back to where I was after he got that money and never did. She never said anything like that.
Yeah, she did say he was supposed to go right back to the tent and meet with her, and that's why she had sat there for several hours. She said that she thought there's a chance he could have just taken the money to go spend it himself, I guess, is what she had said.
Okay, that's certainly possible. All right, so she did say that. Now we're going to talk about one more guy. This is a guy that has come up, and he has a nickname, but we're just going to go by his first name, Jared. Was this a guy that knew Brandon and Gina?
Yeah, I mean, that's a guy that Gina has told to me. Like, I don't know this guy personally at all, but evidently this guy knew both Gina and Brandon, and she admits to having like a relationship with him behind Brandon's back on different occasions, I guess, because she was upset, I guess, at Brandon, she said.
Okay. You had a chance to talk to Jared. What did he have to say about all of this?
He just said that there were times where him and Brandon didn't, get along, but that he would never want anything to happen to him.
Did he, at any time, has he ever offered up his own opinion on what happened to Brandon?
Not a ton, but just has mentioned that maybe Brandon could have gotten into altercation with somebody and something has happened to him, but never has known anything for sure that he was aware of.
Okay. Has Gina and or Jared ever pointed the finger at Dominic or Dominic's father, or a combination of both, in regards to this disappearance?
I mean, Gina's thought maybe that it could be possible that he may have had something to do with it, meaning Dominic, but has never had any sort of factual information as far as I'm aware of.
Okay. All right, so we have the situation. We're still, once again, it sounds to me, it's still very unclear what exactly went down after Brandon was at that McDonald's. Seemingly, he did get a ride with Dominic, but unfortunately, the story's changed, and it's a big question mark after that. Is that still your perception as well, Jenny?
Yes.
It is. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Let's move on to this. Now, I'm sure, and I've, I know you've done a lot, and you've sent me a lot of information already, and we're going to try to arrange after we're done with this interview, which we're doing. Everybody should know that we're doing this interview on November 27th of 2022. But I know that you're going to also be sending me even some more information after we're done. But could you have ever imagined that you would be in this situation, whether it was with Brandon or anybody, that you'd be looking into a disappearance and trying to figure out what happened to somebody that you really cared about?
No, I could have never, ever imagined. I feel like I was so uninformed even about how often this truly does happen until it happened to Brandon. And just having to answer questions like from my children now who know their dad has been missing for over a year, and trying to come up with some sort of an answer, not having any true answers myself on where he is, trying to explain it to him. I never in a million years would have imagined this.
Mm-hmm. How difficult has this been? And because of some of the information that you've already given me that we really don't want to go into right now, but I know that this has been very, very difficult on you. Even though, you weren't even Brandon's girlfriend anymore, but of course you have two children together. Usually when I interview people, it's usually like the mothers of missing children. Here you are, an ex-girlfriend, doing all of this to find out what happened to Brandon. I mean, what kind of toll has this taken on you over the last year?
Oh, a lot. It's really consumed, honestly, a lot of my time, just like the ups and downs, like with our kids, with Brandon's mom and I. She is like my mom too, or the closest thing that I have to a mother. And same with his dad and his family. We're all very close to them, and we always were, even when Brandon and I weren't together. So it's been so hard trying to navigate all of this stuff, just trying to support the kids and his parents and other family members, and with no answers ourselves, it's been very difficult.
Mm-hmm.
But the main thing that just sticks with me is the first time my kids asked me, like, if their dad was dead.
Yeah.
And I don't know where this even came from, but I just was able to tell them that the last we knew he was alive, and that's what we have to believe until we find something else out differently.
Right. That's right. Do you have a Facebook page or website, anything like that, set up for Brandon's disappearance?
Yeah, like I have my Facebook page, which I always keep information primarily regarding Brandon on there, because I wasn't really big into social media prior to him going missing, and I've kind of backed away from it a little bit. But we also have the Help Bring Brandon Home page that's also on Facebook, where we try to provide different updates, pictures, or spreading ways to spread the word. And just so either one of those pages, you can find updates on him there.
Okay. Bring Brandon Home is the Facebook page.
It's Help Bring Brandon Home.
Okay. Okay, and are you an administrator on that, Jenny?
Yeah, myself as well as Kelly Summers, and then
Kelly.
We also, or if you just honestly Google Brandon Richart, missing Minnesota or something along those lines, there's also one of the local news stations did a piece on his disappearance, and you can also find different links to the Facebook and social media pages that way. We also had somebody, I believe that'll bring you to also like a YouTube link, as well as like a TikTok link that was done by people that volunteered to help out and help spread the word.
Okay, very good. And I will be linking to all of that before this episode comes out on December 2nd. Jenny, any final words before we complete this interview?
Just that we know, I always say there's two things we know: that somebody does know truly what happened and where he is, and that we know he would never have left like this on his own, so we know something did happen, but that somebody does know what happened to him, and we just pray every day that we finally get those answers.
Jenny, thank you for appearing on this episode of Unfound.
Thank you for having us on here.
You're welcome. And that was my November 27th, 2022 interview with Jenny Whiting, ex-girlfriend of Brandon Richart and mother of 2 of his children. I thank her for appearing on this episode. The very first point that hits me as I start this summation is how many missing people we've featured who were in the process of going to rehab or just getting out of rehab or who were in the midst of it. Yes, I know Brandon technically wasn't going to rehab per se, but surely him being part of the Stepping Stone program was staying away from drugs and being a responsible adult. Surely. Some of Unfound's disappearances I'm thinking of regarding this topic: Noah Davis, Tim Beauchart, Jessica Hamby, and those are just 3 right off the top of my head. I'm sure there are several more. So we must consider this while thinking about Brandon's disappearance. Overall, opinions vary on this phenomenon, but a popular idea is that these people wanted one last hit before going to rehab and overdosed. Or the rehab didn't take, and the people went right back to doing what they were doing before and overdosed because their body's tolerances had dropped. But probably the bigger elephant in the room is the cash. Really, what are the odds that on the very day Brandon is getting it, whether it was $1,000 or $2,000 or whatever, that he would go missing? And you know how much I don't like coincidences. The problem is, this doesn't help us out too much. Sure, somebody who knew he was getting the cash could have jumped him, and on the streets, the attacker could be friend or foe. Cash rules all. However, we also know the worst thing that can happen for people in Brandon's personal situation is to just give that person cash. Why? Because the most likely outcome is the person will give in to his greatest temptations. And on that topic, I have a hard time believing an 18-year-old on the spot came up with the idea of paying Brandon off with cash. Because this sounds more like a scheme of a guy who had no money and who had been living on the streets than an 18-year-old who was going to school. Really, that Dominic even showed up at the McDonald's that day was fortunate for Brandon, because I think a lot of people would have forgotten about the whole thing as soon as they left the accident scene and not followed through with paying any cash to anyone. That I believe Brandon came up with this payoff means I'm inclined to believe Brandon inadvertently created a lot of possible suspects by telling them he was getting cash due to his on-the-spot idea of forcing money out of an 18-year-old because he was all excited about it. And that might be the biggest unhappy accident of all. I'll leave the theorizing up to you. And that's the program. Right now, while you are in your podcast platform, Spotify, YouTube, iTunes, wherever, give Unfound a 5-star review, a thumbs up, whatever that platform allows. I thank you for listening. I'm Ed Densel, and you've just finished this episode of Unfound.